Hello, welcome to the 9th and final webinar of the Environmental Peacebuilding and Transitional Justice webinar series. This project has discussed matters relating to conflict, environment, natural resources, peacebuilding, and transitional justice, with the objective of documenting views and opinions from the African region and developing guidelines on the incorporation of environmental and natural resource aspects in transitional justice processes. Thus, this will call for the diverse actors involved in post-conflict societies to adopt environmentally sensitive approaches in their initiatives. My name is Roland Bresson, and I am one of the project team members. Today, we're going to have a discussion from the North African, Sahel, and Saharan perspective. In our last webinars, we got perspectives from the other regions of Africa, and today we look forward to another engaging discussion as we round out our series. Our panelist today is Dr. Yosef Ben-Mir, the president of the High Atlas Foundation. Our moderator today is Munini Mutuku. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and also to use the chat section for your questions, and to keep audio muted to limit background noises. I would also like to recognize and appreciate the efforts of EnPax led by Carl Brook and the team of Shayla, Claire, Harriet, and others. I would also like to appreciate the Bosch Alumni Network led by Sarah Hammerl, among others. They have been very supportive from the start of the series. At this juncture, I invite Carl to give some opening remarks. Thank you.
Hi, welcome. And I have to say I'm delighted that you're able to join us. This has been an incredibly rich series of webinars and discussions, and it's been interesting to see how different groups in different regions approach these issues. So I'm very excited to that we're able to hear from the North Atlas and North Africa perspective. I should say perspectives. This is part of a series of webinars that is trying to engage people such as yourselves to think about what have we learned about environmental peace building and transitional justice, and where do we go? And as such, part of it is to synthesize, and part of it is to look forward. And as we look forward, the results of this will be shared at the second International Conference on Environmental Peacebuilding, which will be held both in Geneva and online as a hybrid event from February 2nd through 4th of 2022. So look forward to a rich discussion as we've had with our other sessions. And I would like to particularly recognize the leadership of Munini Mutuku and the support of Sarah Hammerl, as well as the abiding support of Harriet, Roland, and Miriam, who have made this series possible. Thank you all.
Roland, you're muted in case you're speaking.
Oh, I wasn't, but I guess, yeah, if you wanted to take over from here, Munini.
Thank you so much, Roland. I also want to recognize the presence of Sarah from the Bosch Alumni Network. And Sarah, you're welcome to give a few remarks. Sarah?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the invite, and apologies for being a bit late, but I'm very excited to be joining, especially since this is the last session, not of the whole process, hopefully, but the last webinar. And I can just emphasize what Carl already mentioned, that first of all, congratulations to you, Munini, but also to your whole team, and Roland and Miriam, we have also met quite regularly. It was fascinating to see how, from initially a very precise idea, not so much on the webinars, but on the problem itself and Munini's ideas for how to fix it, we actually have opened up the discussion to such a diverse set of actors from a diverse set of countries, bringing in even more concrete challenges that I think Munini had initially in her mind. So which I think is great, which we need. So you really opened up the field. You invited a lot of different voices, multiple voices coming in, which I think will increase the ownership of any kind of policy recommendation that you're hopefully carrying forward. So yeah, congratulations to holding this process together. And I'm very much looking forward where this will lead to further. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Carl, and thank you to Roland and everyone who's been very supportive to this process. And I also want to thank our participants and our panelists who have been making the discussions very rich, our participants who kept us company and kept asking the questions that need to be asked so that we can continue with the discussion and continue enriching the discourse. So for today, we are in North Africa, and we want to recognize the presence of Dr. Youssef, who will be participating with us. And Dr. Youssef is a sociologist and president of the High Atlas Foundation, a Moroccan US not-for-profit organization dedicated to sustainable development. He is from Morocco. So Dr. Youssef is chief of party of USAID's Religious and Ethnic Minorities Activity in Morocco and a visiting professor at the University of Virginia's International Studies Office. In Morocco, he was a Peace Corps volunteer, associate Peace Corps director, and also a professor at Al-Aqam University at the School of Social Sciences and Humanities. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of New Mexico, an MA in International Development from Clark University, and a BA in economics from the New York University. Dr. Youssef, we will take this opportunity to welcome you and to thank you for participating with us. It's your moment. Dr. Youssef, in case you're speaking, we can't hear you, you're muted.
I thank you and everyone, and I'm very grateful to be here. I'm in a car, and my children had the opportunity to visit family with the COVID situation. The window opened, and we had just today, and so we seized it. And so forgive me for not being in a sort of a stationary place. It's a hugely important topic of environment and peace building and opportunity in relation to how it exists and can be built upon here in Morocco. I'm going to describe a case that began over 20 years ago and see its evolution and draw from this that have and relates incredibly well within lessons learned that we see in literature and cases around the world, and I hope stands useful in reminding us. In Morocco, which has 10 national parks, the borders of them have been drawn to exclude the neighboring communities. Most of these parks are in mountain regions, and they serve as the summer pasturelands for the herds of the people, goat and sheep most typically. And so when a lot of these areas, which include the highest elevation points in North Africa, and therefore indigenous or endemic vegetation life, and other kinds of incredibly important natural gifts, they're experiencing significant environmental challenges. And so what Morocco, the government, the High Commission of Waters and Forests has dedicated to do, beginning in the mid-90s, is to see how development within the village environment can help offset any losses that the communities incur if they were to accommodate nature conservation goals within the park area. I want to say that as this situation unfolds and I describe further, we'll see how peace building, including international peace building, can be well integrated into what is a local rural initiative. So the question becomes, what is it that the people want? How do they see their futures so that they may be willing to, for example, not allow their goat and sheep to graze above a certain elevation point, or to be part of a rotation pattern of exclosures in areas that they have been able to have complete access and ownership for centuries. And that is bound in critical ways to their identity and sustenance. In order to know what people want, for a lot of years, the High Atlas Foundation, like so many organizations across the world, governmental as well as civil and private, understand that communities' decision of what projects are their priorities is essential for those projects to have long life and be successful, to generate the income or education or health benefits that the people seek. And so for so many years, if working toward ensuring that women and men and people of all ages are part of that, people who have land, people who don't, that are part of that discussion, if they were only all in the room, then the identification of initiatives that reflect consensus and shared will would emerge, would become clear. And through the establishment of that initiative, clean drinking water, a tree nursery, whatever it may be, through the establishment of that initiative, self-described by the people, will compel them to accommodate the environmental goals. However, what we found was that when we are taken by inhibitions and self-doubt, and we're without confidence, and when there are social controls in the room and internalized, that even as we are free or open to be part of that decision-making process, within ourselves, we're not free. Within ourselves, we inhibit and not express and not pursue what we may feel we want in our hearts. And oftentimes we may not even know and be thrown within that participatory setting with uncertainty. For us in the High Atlas Foundation, it culminated into a clear and multiple cases of where groups of women, in this case, rather than consensus through ongoing continual dialogue, the community decided for a vote. We knew how the women had felt in prior meetings, but they voted diametrically against what they expressed they wanted because of those internalized, our internalized patriarchy, our internalized inhibition. And without the belief to pursue what it is we actually want. And so what we found necessary in this process was that participatory development and planning and inclusion is not enough. That if we are to build bridges with environmental agency and other bridges that I'll describe, that we need to precede our community planning with the self-discovery and often dismantling of matters that limit our thinking or limit our sense of determination to pursue. For example, what are our familial relationships? What is our view of our own bodies that fill us with insufficient confidence? How do we view money and work? How does spirituality and our sense of it figure into our capacity to know and pursue? We reached out to a number of organizations that deal with these kinds of internal analyses that are done in group settings. And there is an Imagine methodology that we've adapted and added to, which is now a 4-day, 32-hour experience before we even talk about development, before we talk about the environment, before we pursue and make decisions related to the change that we seek. We deal first with the introspection needed to ensure that, for example, and which is often enough, we have found in cases where, what if there is forms of abuse? And in those cases, we've learned that we have to integrate human rights into this 4-day experience and legal recourses in situations of the Moroccan family code, so that people know what is their choices they can make in such situations. We are now, for an organization entirely dedicated to participatory planning and the projects that emerge from that, we are no longer trustful of the projects that emerge if they haven't been preceded, if the participatory approach hasn't been preceded by this Imagine experience. Because of the level of intense self-analytical honesty that occurs during this transformational 4 days. Now, I feel like is it okay if I ask, does anyone have any questions, or am I also, how am I doing on time? I wasn't sure exactly how much time I have, but is there anyone would like to express a thought before I continue the narrative of how far this can be taken, these approaches?
You can continue, Dr. Yosef, and then we will ask the questions. I have a few questions, but we will ask them after you're done. You have the next 15, 20 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Now, when we go through these experiences, what are the projects that are most commonly identified? Now, I haven't yet spoken about the High Commission of Waters and Forests and those who regulate and pursue the interests of the environment. This is entirely so far community-centered. In order to get to know what is truly in the interest of the people as they define it. Now, in Morocco, we have a situation where 80% of agricultural land only generates 10 to 15% of agricultural revenue. And that is because of the incredible dependence on barley and corn grown in a traditional way. And even as more than 50% of these staples have to be imported out of necessity. Fortunately, in Morocco, there are 13 varieties of fruit trees and dozens of medicinal plants that grow organically. Dozens of endemic varieties of fruit, subspecies, that grow in Morocco. There are 10 varieties of fig that are specific to this country. There's a native variety of date called the Aziza that is 10 times the price of an average, say, price of a date. So as this dependence on barley and corn, 75% of the people who experience poverty on rural places, 80% of their income comes from agriculture. So out of all, multiple things are needed to be done within the agricultural sector to deal with this generational, systemic, terrible burden upon the people. But part of it is one of many solutions that are necessary is the transition from barley and corn to fruit trees and medicinal plants and far more livelihood enhancing crop that are sustainable. And so there's this enormous demand on fruit trees in the country. Right now, the Hylas Foundation helps communities in their managing of 13 nurseries around the country, all totaled 1.6 million seeds, saplings, of which 1 million will be transplanted starting this December until the end of the season in March. Last year, we have engaged 6,000 farming families with 700,000 trees. This year, the goal is 10,000, and to reach 2 million saplings in 15 nurseries. All of this because of this enormity of demand, and therefore the increasing price of fruit trees that is occurring in this country. An average, of course, it depends on, an almond tree may go for $1. An argan tree for almost $2. A walnut tree for $2.50. Cherry tree similar to that. The Hylas Foundation provides these trees at 20 cents, no matter the variety. And we can't go to 30 cents to show you the difficulty that farmers are having here, and rural farming families are having. And so the increasing demand and increasing price is preventing a great many, from our view, the majority, from being able to access the trees they need for the transition they require for basic livelihood. And of course, I'm talking about so many municipalities where you'll have less than 5 or less girls going to school after primary, where still the number one priority is access to clean drinking water. There's 4 times the difficult, the illness rate from unclean water in rural areas versus urban. So, so when the people make their project determinations, projects along the value chain will, of course, emerge. And when an organization is dedicated to the imagined participatory process and whatever projects may result from that, we are naturally, as an organization, dedicated to the agricultural sector because that's where the rural communities are, of 14 million Moroccan people. Now, when that, of course, we're dedicated to cooperative building, which the people identify, where growers are the processors, and organic certification, and every layer I'm describing, increasing the value of the grower's product. Irrigation infrastructure, which if it's drip irrigation, you can increase the amount of arable space from 1/3 to 1/2. They're retaining value from trees because it's their nurseries. And by the way, the 20 cents goes back into reseeding and maintaining their nurseries for subsequent seasons. And so they're retaining and gaining value at each step of the value chain. And when these identification of initiatives are in place, that is the time to then talk about, that they are able to talk about and be able to accommodate the environmental goals that are held by the national parks and forestry management bodies and those interests that seek to represent and fulfill the environmental goals of the nation. But also the act of these projects themselves, using local varieties, championing the endemic subspecies of fruit, going and the most typical varieties, but going across the 13, all of these things are, water conservation and retention and the infrastructure surrounding that, and nurseries managed by women, which is not just about creating trees that are conducive to the environment, but also about social justice. And in Morocco, planting trees with on land lent by the Moroccan Jewish community. So here's another dimension. I feel like I don't want to get too far, but think about this. The projects themselves. Moroccan Jewish people lived up until the 60s in the very locations that I'm referring to, the mountain regions, and therefore have sacred cemetery places there. There are 600 in the country. And a farming community cannot forego their land for a year or two in order to grow a nursery, which is part of the bottleneck here. And so we are in the pursuit of land lent to the people to build their nurseries. Now we get part of the land from the High Commission of Waters and Forests so that the communities can build their nurseries. From the Ministry of Education, we have a school and an empty area that's part of the school but unused by the students. And so therefore it can be lent without cost to the community to build their nursery. But we also get land from the Moroccan Jewish community because next to their cemeteries, which is still land belonging to the Moroccan Jewish community, it's empty. And the Moroccan Jewish community gives it to them, lends to them without cost, with indefinite amount of time, without a duration end. And so therefore, when we say the growing of nurseries using endemic seed, we're talking about women and girls part of this, which overcomes the gender division of production because usually it's in the male domain, but we're also talking about multicultural, intimate, regard. And what's critical here is that it's the people's decided it's the nursery first, and then the pursuit of land follows. And so it's the Moroccan Jewish community responding to the will of the people, responding to what they've determined they want. And that's key for the peace. It's key for the trust. And that's same for the High Commission of Waters and Forests. There is not a historical reason why these bodies, the community and their associations, will be getting along with a paramilitary organization that really for generations just focused on enforcement. And so when they contribute land to a community because the community decided that's what they want, that's part of the peace. Later, as you may know, Morocco normalized relations with Israel November, I believe, last year. And one of the early projects in the 90s was after the community identified the redirection of a spring at 3,800 meters along a mountain summit, redirected along a mountain summit, so you can, with pressure drip system, build new terraces down that mountainside and plant cherry. It's the snow cold environment. There was a somewhat not a successful effort in terms of implementation, but a successful effort in terms of dialogue leading to a shared Middle East regional MERC, which is out of USAID, ultimately declined. But in any case, relations were suspended from that time till last year. So it couldn't be implemented anyway. But we got to a point of a shared proposal based on using Israeli input in a community identified irrigation project. And it became somewhat acceptable because it was a Moroccan local determined initiative. And that's the same in the Moroccan Jewish land case. The initiatives themselves become what brokers the peace. And what allows the initiatives to broker the peace is because we started with people's participation in decision-making, which then we integrated Imagine, and getting to the heart of hearts of what people want. And from there, building the relationships, including ones that have been historically antagonistic, building the relationships from there with bodies, governmental, international ones, that can share in that peace building. It also becomes a measure of public diplomacy. The very first funding we received in 2003 from the US Embassy in Rabat was because we presented the tree planting as one that will enhance the image of the United States in the eyes of the people, because the United States Embassy will be pursuing the project that the people so decided. There are so many definitions of what participation in development means. And what I'm expressing is, in all aspects, at the very outset, in management, in control, in evaluation, in determination of partnerships, in financial management, in redirection and redesign. And when such projects are based in that, in that process that we cannot take for granted, and that is never easy, and that when we look back upon seems in a sense miraculous, because no one could ever predict all of the nuances and ins and outs and all the road it had to take, but yet entirely achievable. When peace building and partnerships are based on that kind of genuine participation, then the environmental integration with development becomes real, and the transformation of our relationships become right in front of us. I say that because after 27 years, we're left with memories. And one of that, within that handful for me, is the Moroccan next to a 1,000-year-old Jewish cemetery, to where for Morocco, it's normal and natural and completely consistent, while so many may find it extraordinary. So with that, you know, I will say that I know that a lot of your work and consideration is about aspects where there's open conflict and perhaps violent conflict. And I will say that we work in the Sahara region, and what's key to all of this is not only absolutely remaining true to pursuing the projects designed in the way I described, but that of invitation, that the participation begins because of the catalyst being their participation in the form of an invitation. And when that's in place, then in more extreme violent situations than I described, what I described to you is possible. And as we've seen through water projects, school projects, and cooperative building projects in the Sahara that we're fortunate to have been of assistance. So with that, I'll leave it, and I'm grateful to all of you for caring about this Moroccan story.
Thank you very much, Dr. Youssef, for that very interesting story, emphasizing quite a number of things, emphasizing the question of people determination, people making decisions, deciding what they want, local determination of initiatives, a broker for the peace, which is a very critical point. You talked about building relationships, which is also part of peace building, transforming relationships, which is very key in the peace building sector. I remember the Pathways for Peace report that was done by World Bank and the UNDP talked about lack of inclusivity of the people is one of the causes of conflict. It's no longer the competition for political power as such, but when people are not included in decisions that concern the developments in their own region, that is becoming a cause of violent conflict. Very key. Thank you for mentioning that. You have also brought in the question of communities and conservation, parks and borders and excluded communities. You've talked about the integration of peace building into local initiatives, even the tree planting initiatives. They don't only have to be peace meetings, but any local initiative. How do we integrate peace building? The identity and livelihoods is very critical in the discussion that we are having. You've talked about patriarchy and the inhibitions, especially internalized inhibitions, which affect not only the Moroccan people and not only the women, but also within the African continent. We see a lot of internalized inhibitions and a lot of lack of trust in the efforts that we can put forward to help address our own issues. You've talked about participatory planning, very critical. Transition in sustainable agricultural products. When people make their determination, projects will emerge along the way when people make decisions of projects they want. And another key issue you kept raising is the inclusion of women and girls, the question of gender in the peace building and environmental field and initiatives. Thank you so much for that presentation and for those very critical points that you have raised. So now it's time for questions, and I see a few questions, and I want to remind our participants that was Dr. Youssef speaking to us from Morocco. And the first question comes in, you may have talked about spirituality. And the question is, what is the role of spirituality in the questions of environment and peace building you're talking about? Another question is, environmental factors, were they a threat multiplier during the Arab Spring that we experienced in the northern of Africa? Maybe we can take those two, and then we can take more. Dr. Youssef?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a very good question. And one of the things, perhaps I'll describe it like this. Of course, in Islam, the aspects of being part of and relating to and safeguarding the environment is indelible. And I think I'll describe how that manifests in an example. If we were to go through And as I mentioned, clean drinking water most always emerges as number one. If we were to go through that process and the community so determines that it's clean drinking water, and then provide the rebar, the materials needed in order for it to be built, the people will build it without pay, without cost. And then, as we know, many tons of a basin, it's really hard work, especially when it's done with gravity flow, meaning on a mountainside. We have to bring the sand from the river banks, and but they'll do it without in kind. If one were to simply just show up without decision making, without the group community going through that process with materials, there won't be that same commitment of labor in kind. That we are willing to give our deepest energy when we're part of the decisions. And when we're not, we won't necessarily know what to use those materials for, but we won't own that outcome and won't be committed to its maintenance because we weren't involved in its determination. The only project that I've ever seen to have sustainability, not to an ideal degree, but to have some sustainability without complete community decision-making, is tree planting. There is something universal, spiritual, inescapable about trees when we look at its connection to ourselves. Wherever we may be, the likelihood is we will see to its life because of our spirituality, because of our culture influenced by our religion, because of our parents and surroundings, because of maybe even an instinct. I'll say something. So that's what I say to that. There is we don't need. Now, of course, we plant with young people, and we need to learn about biodiversity and how to plant a tree and how to take care. So there's a lot of technical aspects we need to transfer, and it may be planted and it may die without the technical transference, and we need community management for that technical component. But because there are environmental aspects that can be upheld because of their spiritual connectivity to our humanity. And we've seen examples of that in Morocco.
Thank you very much. Another question that comes in is dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution. How does that work within the environmental arena where you are? How do communities use alternative dispute resolutions to resolve their disputes?
Yes.
How do environmental aspects come in, or how are they addressed within these platforms?
That's a great question. And I guess I'll say two things. One, in relation to the fact that we as facilitators, project managers, and I don't mean I mean we on this call. I mean we, in part of the organizations with whom we work, we concerned with the issues we're talking about. We need to have methods of reconciliation. What do we do in the room when there is gender-based difference, ethnic-based difference, resource-based difference, distrust? What is our approach? What is our tactic? How can we instill recognition and acknowledgement? How can we get the stories told so that there is some shared understanding can have a chance? What happens when there's an eruption? How do we, as managers and organizations and facilitators, help make that happen? And so we need to have our methods, and we need to be trained in them experientially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's useful, and that's in our toolkit, and we carry that with us where we go. However, of course, communities that have been where they are for centuries have their ways that are effective and generational on how to resolve conflict. In Morocco, a community meeting in the very space I'm talking about, within minutes, there was a complete tension and shouting and aggression at the moment of assembly. And it was managed as traditionally conflicts are managed by an elder or two speaking quietly to each side and then the other, and finally that back and forth, and they remain in that same space, separate, but finally that back and forth calmed and allowed for direct communication over time. Now, I was in there. Do we know, as people dedicated to these approaches, well, if one side expresses and you list their concern and the other side expresses this concern, or can you have one side express their concern and a member from the other side write it? So there's sort of implicit recognition. There are all kinds of approaches that can be taken that we need to know, but we need to also give complete space to local forms of managing decision-making, inclusive. The other thing I'll say is this: we've seen land disputes resolved in locally determined ways. What is the border of where this group of community villages can bring their goat and sheep, and to what is the limit? And they decided that a member from each community at a certain point in the morning, right after the early morning prayer, they will walk. And where they meet is the border. That's a traditional local way of resolving dispute, which 100 years later is still respected, that border. So the reliance on local know-how and approaches in no way takes away our responsibility in being experiential trained in approaches that have been applied around the world and adapted within our country, wherever we may serve. But we also have to be completely willing to let go of them in lieu of the community's own application.
What is the space for women in these alternative dispute resolution platforms? And what is the space for women? And when you talk about women and tree nurseries, do the women own the product or the final product of the trees, or do they just manage the tree nurseries and then the final product is owned by the men, including the resources that come from it?
Yeah, that's a really important point. I'll take the second question first. What is owned by the women are the saplings. And so as they are sold, they generate revenue, which enables for reinvestment. Now, part of what, land, the acquisition of land and how we can able to gain land for the benefit of women's groups in Morocco has to be from typically that sort of bumper contribution of land that we get from the High Commission of Waters and Forests, or from, that currently is in the public domain managed by whatever entity, but we're able to bring over an X amount of square meters or hectares designated for women's groups. And so what we've been able to acquire land in that regard, where not just women are in control of the nurseries, but are able to plant. But, I'm talking about 2 examples in a country. This is, the path to justice, the fact that we put, we're able to put in good examples the nurseries under the control of women in no way puts them in control of the yield. And so, but I will say this, that in villages where we've simply allowed for the purchase of trees, we saw no measurable benefit for women in terms of literacy or opportunity or revenue or anything of the sort. Where we have seen women in control of nurseries, we have seen those indirect benefits in the form of literacy and not just revenue for reinvestment, but potentially revenue for activities further down the value chain, drying product, selling to end users, not just in bulk, those kinds of enhancements. So it's positive, but in no way complete when the yields of the fruit are not theirs. In terms of the first question, it really, in a sense, what I just said relates. The UN number, I'm not sure to the extent it changed, but 2/3 of all working hours on Earth are by women, 1% of property, 10% of income. I mean, how that was, I know it's from a few decades ago, but how powerfully has that changed? Changed, but not in a wide-eyed way that would stun us or that's acceptable even. So at all. So all I could say is that in terms of participatory methodology, we entirely focus on women. When we engage men, we are now training men to be facilitators of Imagine, so they become part of the gender movement. And in 3 years, we've been able to involve approximately 1,000 women, groups of 25, less during the COVID, less than 25 during the workshops that are outside under the COVID situation. So, it's positive for the 1,000. It's a model that we are in a position to finally scale, to be able to say to you that we even have a methodology has been years of back and forth. You can imagine what methodologies take when they are based on an integration of many. But I could point to examples that we need to replicate, but we are entirely insufficient on anything remotely transformational other than for the individuals involved. So that's all I could say. I feel like it's even negligible. I feel like if I even talking, it's good to talk about because it's true and real and it's our life's work. But where are we really when we work in municipalities where middle school for girls is the absolute exception, where the cooperatives I'm talking about is truly lightning in a bottle, where very few % of the cooperatives have any certification to sell beyond their locality. We are in very serious difficulty in Morocco.
Good questions to ask. One, we have seen the opening up of free trade within the African region. And you have talked about the organic products that the farmers are working on in Morocco. So the question is, the increase of trade and demand for organic products, how does that affect the rural farmer?
It's something that we all share. In Cameroon, it's avocado, it's mango. Mm-hmm. How much do we spend in some of the countries where we are or where we're from for an organic avocado? $2.50, $3. How much are we spending for them in Cameroon? And how difficult is life there for that grower?
Mm.
And so and that's why we're on this call from different countries, because what we're each doing is completely relevant. Well, the farmers and all the product that you can tell me from all the different countries that you work in on the continent, we are talking about maybe every product of every fruit that exists in the world. And will we ever see a better day when we are getting a few cents per unit? And then some places, if that. And so does it start with organic certification? No. Mm. Does it start with the nursery? No. Mm. Are we in a position to assist the growers to gather and make their decisions and put some capacity building and resources behind it? But can we first gather? Okay, we can't even commit to the resources and capacity building behind their decision. But that we don't need that commitment yet. We just need to gather them for their decision making. Can we do that? And so we just have to, and I know whom I don't need to explain this. I'm talking to people that you do the very thing I'm saying. And so I'm not, but what I guess, so often we think that we have to have the resources for the chain, or we have to have the resources for organic certification to start. No, the momentum with persistence will get the resources we need for the next steps. But the next steps are in our control. We need to gather the people. We need to assist their decision-making. They need to come to their conclusions, and they need to make a commitment of what they're willing to give, and most often in the form of labor. But once that's in place, then we're in a position to rally resources that we need to get the organic certification. So that's what I would say to that. I mean, 80% rural Moroccans are in poverty, and they are growing gold. Only 6 countries in the world grow almonds. Morocco grows almonds, not a single one exported. 4,000 hectares of pomegranate, not a drop of juice. And how many of you in your places can say the same thing? Mm-hmm. So it is organic certification, but we can't get there unless we go through that emotional, difficult introspection that's needed to unleash who we are.
Thank you. The Great Green Wall of Africa, the concept that was begun in 2007 so that we can green or stop the extension of the Sahara Desert. Talk to us a bit about the Great Green Wall of Africa and what you're doing in terms of tree planting and regenerating the environment within Morocco.
Well, by my reaction, you can already tell not enough. Mm-hmm. And if I tell you to the extent not enough, if I tell you the scarcity of nurseries in the nurseries that grow the trees for the Great Wall need to be as close as possible to that wall to enable the maximum survivability of those tree varieties. And the level of scarcity of nurseries in that proximity is bewildering, to where trees need to be brought down at a cost that makes it completely unaffordable and for most out of reach. So, we need real resolution to what prevents people from coming together. Because without it, we're seeing the pace of what is really essential to be really kind of just remaining an idea. You know, Morocco with its mountains has, in a sense, these natural walls, but who would ever want the encroachment to get so far? So what I would say to that is, even as we have contributions of land to build the nurseries in close enough proximity to where we need to, you know, draw a line of defense against desertification, it's the resources, financial, that we need to build it. And when there is such concern or disharmony, it prevents the flow of those necessary finance to make these kinds of projects real for the people.
Mm. When we look at Northern Africa, we see the question you have mentioned of desertification, questions of water scarcity, capitalist exploitation. We have a lot of oil and gas within the Northern African region. What would environmental justice look like for Northern Africa in reference to these issues?
You know, we manage with partners a project to decentralize renewable energies. As you know, Morocco has been a leader, not on the continent, one arguably in the world, on the extent of national investments in large-scale renewable energy projects, solar, wind primarily. But they are national projects. And like so many national projects, where they land locally can be dislocating, and are. And so what we need here is very likely where you are, which is community-controlled renewable energy initiatives. There needs to be the national, international strategies for matters related to climate, absolutely. And there has to be all-out determination and vigor and investment in local requirements. Because that is an essential part of the equation. And what is needed here is, of course, different from other places. And so that's what I would say. You know, in the end, we're back to the community again. What's going on and what do they need? And how could renewable energy be part of that manifesting of goals that's specific to there? And that's really the recipe. When you're the question emphasized oil and gas, you know, I'm not sure when left to their druthers, my sense of communities is that they're looking for biomass and solar. And they're looking for it in a way that not just is for their household, but for their production activities. And they know about it, and they want it integrated with their water system, and you know, and an essential part of their vision. And so that's what I'm seeing here, and it would surprise me if it were that much different in other places.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you very much, Dr. Youssef. I see only one more question. This is Dr. Youssef calling in from Morocco, who has been presenting to us the issues that the Northern Africa region, giving us recommendations and opinions on what could be done, what should be done. Last question, Dr. Youssef. What support should the African human rights system give in reference to the issues that we have discussed today?
You know, we are in this, we have a new initiative with USAID to preserve, to tell, to share the stories of Moroccan multiculturalism, of interfaith, of diversity, of solidarity, because as we become probably on some levels, in terms of at least religiously, less diverse in Morocco, those who live the diversity are gaining in age, and the youth today in this country aren't necessarily aware of the extent of solidarity across ethnicities and religions that has been part of the Moroccan experience. And so before they're lost, we're here to gather and share. And so there's actually a method, a participatory method before Imagine, but that's not my point. My point is that when we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so much is about the individual and so much is about the group. And that's part of the enduring beauty of that declaration. And of really so many social scientists and philosophers over really centuries, they're looking out for the individual entirely, and they're looking out for the group completely. And so many people, thinkers through time, have said that the two are irreconcilable, that as one is fulfilled, the other will be denied by their very essence. And so what I would say to the organization and relative to our efforts is that we need to find ways where we are able to resolve this riddle, that in fact the individual and the group can be fully satisfied at once, that there are singular initiatives and programs that can bring about that completion that we really all need. None of us want to forego ourselves for the group, and none of us want our complete fulfillment at the complete cost of others. Mm-hmm. So what is our approach to doing that? In the end, it needs to be applicable. And I tried to describe to you a way that has really good examples of meeting that historic threshold of the individual and group being okay together. But it really has to focus on that deepest sense within ourselves of what is your pain and what is your joy and what it is you really want. Mm-hmm. And find a way to have in a group setting for that to come out. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to that room, it comes out to that facilitator, and it's protracted and it's hard, but if we can get to that and keep building from there, then we'll get to the decentralized energy and the trees. And then that tree will never look at the same, because we'll know the story behind that tree is a human process.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yosef. A very good conclusion, very well said final remarks. We say that peace is the cumulative functionality of the whole. It's the whole, the individual and the collective. Thank you so much to our participants for the questions and for the time and for your participation. Thank you so much for joining us in this last webinar. This is our last webinar. You'll find all our webinars uploaded on YouTube and uploaded on the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. We've been having very rich discussions all the way from the Southern Africa, from the East, from the West, and now we have finalized with the North. We look forward to consolidating what has been spoken and contribute to proposed guidelines that will inform the implementation of the African Union Transitional Justice Policy and also inform other country-specific transitional justice policy development processes as we continue to seek justice, especially from an environmental perspective within the continent of Africa. We continue to ask and we continue to answer the question, while transitional justice addresses human rights abuses and crimes as they relate to society, how about environmental abuses and crimes? Can this find space in the discussions and the practice of transitional justice? We will continue with that discussion. Our next webinar will be a validation to look at the guidelines that have been proposed and also to submit the same to the relevant institutions as we continue with that discussion in the future. We thank you so much. We want to appreciate the team from EnPax, Environmental Peacebuilding Association, who are also planning the second International Conference on Environmental Peace Building. And we ensure and want to see the African discussion being discussed on that table. We want to appreciate the Bosch Alumni Network for the support that they have accorded this webinar, a series of webinars, and the series of publications that will be coming in. We want to see policy briefs that will be able to inform not only the guidelines, but also inform country processes that are working on transitional justice, especially from an environmental perspective. We all agree that we depend on the environment, and the environment has a right to exist as much as we have a right to exist. With those few remarks, allow me to close the webinar and allow me to welcome you once again in our next validation. And we will also be sharing the policy briefs when they're ready and the guidelines once they're ready on your emails and on our website. Keep checking our website for the latest updates. And we also want to acknowledge that there are other activities that are going on within the Environmental Peacebuilding Association that are contributing to the second international conference. Thank you so much. And until we see you again, stay safe and see you then. Thank you.